The road curved gently through the bushland, framed by wattle trees heavy with golden blooms. Dust followed the silver car as it made its way up the long gravel drive toward a house that hadn't seen company in years. Claire Hartley hadn't been back in over 2 decades. She told herself it was because of the distance, the cost, the busyness of life. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. It was the silence, the years of unanswered phone calls, the things said and unsaid between mother and daughter. In the back seat, Ellie, her 9-year-old, pressed her face to the window. "Mum, is that Grandma Maggie's house?" Claire didn't answer straight away. The house looked the same, and yet it didn't. The paint had peeled, the fence sagged, but the garden still bloomed with stubborn color, the same way her mother always had. She nodded. "Yeah, that's it." The car rolled to a stop. The air smelled like eucalyptus and old wood. Claire stepped out and looked up at the veranda. She half expected to see her mother there, arms folded, apron dusted with flour. But there was only wind. A key was tucked inside a yellow envelope. No note, just a postmark from a week ago. The handwriting unmistakable. Maggie Hartley had always written like she spoke. Strong, no nonsense, a little slanted. Claire fit the key into the lock. The door creaked open. Dust danced in the afternoon light. The house smelled of cedar and thyme. Ellie darted past her, curiosity brimming. Claire stood in the entryway, letting memories flood in. The hallway still bore the old mirror, the same coat rack, the dent in the skirting board where her father dropped a toolbox once. She closed the door behind her. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The bed felt foreign, though it had once been hers. She sat by the window, looking out over the paddocks. The moonlight spilled silver across the grass. She thought of the last argument she'd had with her mother, sharp words flung like stones. Claire had left that day with anger in her throat and pain in her bones. She had never written, never called. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Claire found the letter. It was tucked inside a blue recipe book, the one with the scone recipe Maggie never shared. She opened it, fingers trembling. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, it means I've gone on ahead, probably fussed about leaving the house clean and worried about your arrival more than I let on. I never said it right, never knew how to. But I loved you, Claire, every day, even the angry ones. I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope you'll find something here worth staying for. There's more to this house than memories. Love, always, Mum." Claire stared at the page. Tears welled up, the kind she didn't wipe away. The next morning, she wandered out to the garden. The roses had overgrown their beds. The wattle trees hummed with bees. She found Ellie crouched near the old coop. "There's a chicken, Mum." Ellie grinned. "Her name's probably Gertrude." Claire laughed for the first time in days. They explored the garden together. Ellie pointed out a small rusted wind chime tangled in a vine. "Did this always hang here?" she asked. Claire reached up and untangled it gently. "Yeah, I remember it used to jingle in the wind when I was your age. Mum said it sounded like angels laughing." Ellie tilted her head. "It kind of does." Inside, they walked through the room slowly. Claire opened a drawer in the hallway table and found an old photo album. Pages filled with birthdays, Christmases, blurry snapshots of pets long gone. One photo showed Claire at about 10, sitting cross-legged on the lounge room floor, a book in her lap, and Maggie behind her with a hand on her shoulder. Claire showed it to Ellie. "That's me, and that's your grandma." Ellie smiled. "She looks like you. Or you look like her." That night, as the wind picked up, they stood out on the veranda. The stars scattered across the sky, and the wattle trees whispered softly in the breeze. Claire closed her eyes and breathed in deep. Somehow she could almost feel her mother standing beside her. Later, as Ellie slept, Claire tiptoed into the living room and lit a small candle on the mantel. She sat on the couch with an old knitted blanket and stared at the framed photo of her parents on their wedding day. Her father in his best suit, Maggie beaming, holding a bouquet of native flowers. Claire whispered, "You both really built a life here, didn't you?" The flame flickered, and the wind brushed the windows as if the house itself sighed. She stood and walked slowly through the kitchen, running her hand along the bench. There were faint scratches from chopping, a burn mark near the kettle, and a crack in one tile that had always driven her mother mad. She let out a small laugh. "Still cracked, Mum. Still here." The kettle whistled softly. Claire made herself a cup of tea and sat alone, the warmth cupped in her palms. A long silence stretched, not lonely, but full. Full of years, of words unspoken, of a daughter trying to remember and beginning to forgive. The next morning brought a stillness that settled over Wattle Hill like a wool blanket. Mist curled through the gum trees and clung to the window panes, blurring the view beyond the paddocks. Claire stood on the veranda, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, watching the world wake slowly. Ellie came outside in her socks, rubbing her eyes. "It's cold." Claire draped her cardigan over Ellie's shoulders and pulled her in close. "Your grandma used to say the mist meant the earth was thinking." "What was it thinking about?" Ellie asked, curling into her side. "Probably how to start again," Claire whispered. They spent the morning cleaning the lounge room. Ellie dusted picture frames while Claire pulled old blankets from the cupboards. She opened a trunk near the fireplace and found it full of yarn, knitting needles and half-finished scarves. Claire smiled. Mum never finished anything she started knitting. Ellie held up a tangled bundle of soft pink wool. "Can I keep this one?" "Of course. Maybe we'll both learn to finish what she started." In the afternoon, they drove into town. The road twisted past wide paddocks and low stone walls. Claire noticed how much had changed. New signs, a bigger cafe, a few fresh coats of paint, but some things were exactly the same. The bakery still had the same chalkboard menu. The chemist still smelled like lavender, and outside the general store stood a wooden bench where she and her mother used to sit and share vanilla milkshakes. Inside, the bell over the door chimed as they entered. Mrs. Barlow, now older but just as sprightly, looked up from the counter. "Well, I'll be," she said, setting down her newspaper. "Claire Hartley. I'd recognize those cheekbones anywhere." Claire smiled, a little shy. "It's been a while." "Your mum was in here just a couple weeks before. Well," Mrs. Barlow's voice softened. "She talked about you every time she came in. Always said, 'One day, Claire will come home.'" Ellie peeked up from behind Claire's coat. "I'm Ellie." Mrs. Barlow bent down and offered her a wrapped lolly from a glass jar. "Pleased to meet you, Ellie. You've got your grandma's eyes." They left with groceries, a new broom, and a warm loaf of sourdough tucked under Claire's arm. As they stepped outside, Claire paused at the bench. She sat down and looked out across the quiet street. Ellie climbed up beside her. "I used to sit here with my mum," Claire said softly. "We didn't always get along, but we always shared a milkshake." "Maybe we can do that too," Ellie offered. "Only with chocolate." Claire chuckled. "Deal!" Back at Wattle Hill, they put groceries away while music played low on an old radio. The knobs were stiff, but it still worked. A country song drifted through the kitchen. Claire found herself humming as she wiped the counters. Ellie danced in her socks, spinning on the floorboards. That evening, Claire opened another one of Maggie's journals. The entry was dated 15 years ago. "Claire called today. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't know what to say. What mother doesn't know how to talk to her own daughter? I sat in the garden afterward, watching the wind in the wattle trees, and wished I had been brave." Claire closed the book gently. She sat there for a long time, letting those words sit with her. That night, Ellie found a small box tucked beneath a loose floorboard under the stairs. Inside was a brooch shaped like a wattle flower, its edges worn smooth with time. "Mum, look what I found." Claire turned it over in her hand. She used to wear this every Sunday. "Do you think she wanted me to find it?" Claire nodded slowly. Maybe she wanted us to find everything she couldn't say. The next day brought light rain. Claire and Ellie stayed indoors, playing board games and baking Anzac biscuits. The oven still ran a bit hot, and the biscuits came out crispier than expected, but Ellie proudly declared them perfect. In the evening, they brought 2 steaming mugs of Milo to the front steps and watched the sky change. Orange faded into purple, then soft blue twilight. Frogs croaked from somewhere near the dam. Ellie leaned her head on Claire's shoulder. "Do you think we'll stay here forever?" Claire hesitated. She looked out at the land, the hills her father had once walked, the garden her mother had tended, the creaky house that still stood firm despite the years. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I think we were meant to come back." The wind rustled through the wattle trees, and Claire knew in her bones that something was beginning again. Claire tucked Ellie into bed that night beneath one of Maggie's old patchwork quilts. The stitching was loose in some places, the colours faded, but the warmth was the same. "Tell me a story about Grandma," Ellie whispered. Claire brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. She used to sing while she cooked. Not proper songs, just silly rhymes she made up. She once made up a song about burnt toast and danced around the kitchen in slippers. Ellie giggled. "You should sing it." Claire laughed softly. "Maybe tomorrow." She sat by Ellie's side until her breathing slowed and her small hand relaxed in hers. Later, Claire walked quietly through the house with a notebook in hand. She made a list of things to fix. The back steps, the loose door handle, a broken shutter upstairs. She didn't know how long they'd stay, but the house deserved care. So did the memories. She paused in the hallway, resting her hand on the wallpaper. It was the same pattern she remembered, blue wildflowers climbing along the edges, a little worn, but still there, just like her. The next morning, Claire awoke to the soft tapping of rain on the tin roof and the faint scent of toast drifting from the kitchen. Ellie was already up, wearing one of Maggie's oversized flannel shirts over her pajamas. "I made toast," she announced proudly. "I used the timer and everything." Claire smiled and ruffled her hair. "Well done, Chef Ellie." They ate breakfast together at the kitchen table, the one with the wonky leg Maggie always meant to fix. Claire pulled out the yellowed placemats and set the teapot on a crocheted coaster that had been there since the 80s. Later, they took advantage of a break in the rain and walked down the back paddock. The path was muddy, and Ellie slipped once, landing with a squeal that turned into laughter. Claire helped her up, and for a moment she was reminded of her own childhood, running barefoot through the grass, Maggie calling out not to ruin her good clothes. They reached the old gum tree near the dam. Claire touched the bark, finding a carved heart with the initials M+J, Maggie and Jack, her father. She smiled. They must have done this when they were young. Ellie traced the carving with her finger. "That's kind of romantic." Claire raised an eyebrow. "It's mostly just permanent graffiti." Back at the house, Claire went through more of the journals. One entry stood out. "The house feels too quiet lately. I keep thinking I hear Claire's voice in the hallway. Maybe I just miss her more than I can admit." There was something comforting and heartbreaking in reading her mother's loneliness scrawled in blue ink. It made Maggie more human, less the towering, stubborn figure Claire remembered, and more a woman who loved, who hoped, and who didn't always know how to show it. That evening, Tom Grayson dropped by with a box of old tools and a container of chicken curry. "Figured you might need both," he said with a grin. He fixed the leaky tap in the laundry while Claire reheated dinner. They sat on the veranda afterward, eating with mismatched forks and listening to the crickets. "She kept this place running for so long on her own," Claire said, mostly to herself. Tom nodded. "She was proud, but she'd never admit when she needed help." Claire looked at him. "She wrote about you in her journals." Tom chuckled. "Uh-oh. Hope it was good. She said you were the most dependable person she knew, and that you reminded her of Dad." His smile faded just a touch, softening into something thoughtful. That's kind of her. As the night deepened and the breeze cooled, Claire leaned back in her chair and watched Ellie chase fireflies in the garden. Maybe this place wasn't just a stop on the way. Maybe it was becoming something more. The following morning, Claire stood in the old laundry, sorting through a basket of faded linens and tablecloths. She'd opened the window to let in the breeze, and it carried with it the scent of fresh grass and early blossoms. Somewhere out near the paddock, kookaburras were laughing. She found a box tucked beneath the bottom shelf. Inside were dozens of old cassette tapes, most labelled in her mother's handwriting, Claire's Year 3 Assembly, Jack's Birthday 1992, Garden Sounds, and one simply marked Rainy Days. She brought the box into the lounge room, dusted off Maggie's cassette player, and slipped in the first tape. A crackle, then a child's voice, her voice, singing off-key, followed by laughter and Maggie's voice joining in. Claire blinked rapidly. Ellie came into the room, drawn by the sound. "Is that you, Mum?" Claire nodded. "That's me. And your grandma." They sat together and listened through old birthdays, school recitals, and one tape that was just Maggie talking softly about the garden, describing the roses, the birds, the bees she'd chased off with a wooden spoon. Later that day, Claire went to the shed behind the house. It was cluttered and dim, but she recognized everything. The rake with the split handle, the ladder with her name still etched into one side, the jars of screws Maggie always said she'd sought but never did. She cleared a bench and set up a little project space. It felt good to use her hands to fix and mend. She started sanding back an old planter box, thinking maybe she and Ellie could plant something new in it. That afternoon, Ellie sat on the veranda painting stones she'd found in the garden. One was blue with white swirls like the sky, another yellow like the wattles. "Can we put these in the veggie patch?" she asked. Claire nodded. "Let's make a path of them, like little markers. Your grandma would have liked that." As the days passed, Claire fell into a rhythm. Mornings were quiet, filled with simple tasks, sweeping, baking, journaling. Afternoons were for exploring, gardening, or sitting with a cup of tea, watching Ellie chase lizards near the shed. One morning, a letter arrived in the post. Not addressed to Claire, but to Maggie. It was from the council, standard paperwork about land boundaries. Claire sighed. So many things needed updating now that the house was hers. She put the letter on the table and glanced at the hallway. There was still one room she hadn't opened. Maggie's bedroom. She stood outside the door for a long moment before finally turning the knob. The room smelled faintly of rose talcum powder and lavender. Everything was neat, bed made, pillows plumped. A robe hung behind the door. On the dresser sat an old brush, a perfume bottle, and a photograph of Claire as a baby. Claire sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The quiet wasn't heavy here. It felt like a space that had already said goodbye. In the bottom drawer, she found a bundle of letters. Every card Claire had ever sent, school drawings, even a receipt for the dollhouse Ellie now played with upstairs. And at the very bottom, an envelope marked, "For Claire, when you're ready." She didn't open it right away. Instead, she carried it out to the veranda and sat in her mother's chair. The breeze was soft. The hills rolled gently in the distance. Finally, she unfolded the note. "My Claire, if this finds you, I hope you're sitting on the veranda with a cup of tea and that the kettle still groans like an old man. I want to say something I never could. I'm proud of you. You lived brave. You raised a beautiful daughter. You came back, not because you had to, but because you were willing to try again. This house, it's yours now. But more than that, I hope it becomes home again for you and for Ellie. Let it hold your laughter, your sorrow, your healing. And if you ever doubt, just look at the garden. Things grow, even when you're not looking. Love always, Mum." Claire sat in silence for a long time. The wind rustled the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a kookaburra called again. That afternoon, Tom dropped by to help clean out the gutters. Ellie showed him her painted stones, proudly explaining each one. This one's the sky. This one's her favorite flower. And this one is a chicken because Grandma liked Gertrude the best. Tom smiled. Sounds like she left behind a whole world. She did, Claire said quietly. As they worked, Tom mentioned a local spring fair coming up in town. You and Ellie should come, he said. It's small, but sweet. Cake stalls, jam judging, that sort of thing. Your mum used to win first prize for her lemon butter every year. Claire laughed. I remember. She wouldn't even share the recipe with me. Well, you've probably got it now, hidden somewhere in one of those journals. They finished the gutters and had tea on the back steps. Claire watched the sky shift into gold. You're settling in, Tom said after a while. The house feels different. Brighter. Claire nodded. Maybe it's just finally being lived in again. At the bottom of a page titled Lemon Butter, for show, not sharing, Claire smiled. In the corner, Maggie had scribbled, If Claire ever finds this, tell her to trust her taste buds. She gathered ingredients and got to work. Ellie perched on a stool beside her, licking a spoon and offering unsolicited critiques. It's a bit tangy, Ellie said, tasting a tiny spoonful. Claire raised an eyebrow. Good. That's how it's meant to be. They packed a small jar of lemon butter in a basket with scones, a loaf of sourdough, and Ellie's painted rocks. It wasn't much, but it felt like they were bringing a piece of Wattle Hill into town. The fair was already alive with colour by the time they arrived. Stalls lined the park, bunting danced in the wind, and the smell of sausages and cinnamon floated through the air. Claire hadn't been to the fair since she was 17. She recognised the old stage where school choirs once sang, and the gum tree where she and her best friend used to trade secrets. Tom waved from the produce tent. There they are. I've got a spot saved for you next to the jam ladies. Claire laughed. That sounds terrifying. He grinned. They're ruthless, but they like lemon butter. Ellie set up her rocks on the edge of the table and explained each one to passers-by. Claire stood behind her basket, offering tastings of her mother's recipe and listening to the gentle rhythm of small-town life around her. Mrs. Barlow stopped by, holding a sponge cake. You're your mother's daughter, Claire. She'd be proud. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. Thank you. Later, the winners were announced. Claire didn't expect anything. She had made the lemon butter for Ellie, for herself, for Maggie. But when they called her name for first place, Ellie leapt into her arms. You did it, Mum! Claire laughed, eyes shining. No, we did it. They drove home that afternoon, tired, full and warm, in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. As they pulled into the driveway, Claire noticed how golden the wattles looked in the late sun. It was the kind of gold that only came at the end of something, or the beginning. That evening, they sat on the veranda with tea and a plate of leftover scones. Tom joined them for a while, telling stories about the town and Maggie's fierce opinions about pineapple in fruit salad. She banned it from church picnics once, he said. Said it didn't belong beside jelly. Claire snorted. That sounds exactly like her. When the sun dipped below the hills and Tom said goodnight, Ellie curled up beside Claire and asked, Are we staying? Claire didn't need to think. Yes, I think this is home now. Over the next few weeks, Wattle Hill changed. Claire mended broken windows, painted doors, and planted flowers with Ellie. They hung Maggie's wind chime back where it used to be. It tinkled in the breeze like laughter. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Claire hosted a little tea for the neighbours. Nothing fancy, just a table under the trees, homemade cake, and good stories. As she poured tea for Mrs. Barlow, she heard Ellie explaining the rocks again. This one is for Grandma's garden. This one is for the sun. And this one is for new beginnings. Claire looked up at the house, the place she once fled from, the place she now chose. After everyone left, she walked through the garden and found herself at the edge of the dam, near the old gum tree. She sat beneath it and pulled a notebook from her pocket, her journal, a new one. She wrote, Today, Ellie painted daisies on the mailbox. Tom fixed the clothesline. I baked lemon muffins and didn't burn them. Mum would have been proud. This place still carries her, but it carries me too now. She paused and listened. The wind whispered through the trees. Frogs croaked. A kookaburra laughed. Claire smiled. Back inside, she tucked Ellie into bed and lingered for a moment, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "You're safe," she whispered. "We're home." That night, Claire stood on the veranda with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars scattered above her like tiny fires. She thought of her mum, her dad, the life they'd built here, the life she was building again. She thought of grace, not the kind you earn, but the kind you grow into. The wind rustled the wattle leaves, and in the stillness, Claire no longer felt like someone returning. She felt like someone who had arrived. The house on Wattle Hill stood quiet, steady, and full of life once more.